2 days from now, on January 25th, we celebrate perhaps the most famous Christian conversion in the history of the entire church. It's the feast of the conversion of St. Paul. So important are the writings and the life of St. Paul for the church, and most especially for the study of the New Testament scriptures, of which St. Paul is probably the single greatest contributor, with the number of epistles which he wrote. But the conversion itself is also important because it reminds us of a feast which we celebrated on the second day of the octave of Christmas, the feast of St. Stephen, the very first martyr of the new church. And you recall that St. Luke, who writes the Acts of the Apostles, writes very carefully and very detailed about the martyrdom of St. Stephen. And at one point he notes that those who put St. Stephen to death placed their cloaks at the foot of a young man named Saul, who gave his full approval to the martyrdom of St. Stephen. This is also important because the martyrdom of St. Stephen, the example Stephen gives of such a beautiful and noble death for the sake of Christ and the gospel, did have an immediate influence on St. Paul. And in the later missionary travels of St. Paul, he alludes to this. He doesn't even use Stephen by name, but it's unmistakable that he's writing about the martyrdom of St. Stephen, which had an immediate and at least remote influence on his own conversion and his wholehearted and willing acceptance of his vocation given to him by Jesus himself to be the apostle to the Gentiles. And so this coming Friday, if you are able, I urge you, attend and participate at Holy Mass and listen carefully to the prayers, the proper prayers of the Mass for the conversion of St. Paul, but also the readings from sacred scripture, which the Church specifically assigns to this beautiful feast. And then perhaps meditate on conversion itself. It's not just changing one's way of thinking or speaking or even acting. It's not just altering what we say or think or do. True conversion is a turning completely away from one thing and turning to and living something else. In the person of St. Paul, we see that he turns away from willfully persecuting Christ, which he very sorrowfully admits more than once in his epistles. But he turns away from all of that in order to turn to Christ wholeheartedly, take on his life and the mission Jesus gives him to be an apostle, so that he is able to say with the greatest assurance and true humility, it is no longer I who live, it is Christ who lives in me. May you continue to grow in your holiness of daily life and fulfill your baptismal vocation to holiness as we continue to celebrate ordinary time and these beautiful feasts which the Church offers us for our own, not just meditation, but our imitation. God bless you.